Now, what about the religious implications if a UFO lands on the White House lawn? What's going to happen? Well, in 2005, outside Washington, D.C., I attended what's called an X conference, and it's deliberately held outside Washington so that the aides to the Congress people and senators can go and find out about UFOs. The keynote speaker was the Monsignor Corral del Belducci, the late Monsignor Corral del Belducci. He had worked in the Vatican, I was told, but he was very passionate about UFOs. He had supposedly been on Rome radio a number of times talking about UFOs, and he was the keynote speaker. So here's some quotes that he made. He said, "We've come to the point that we cannot anymore delay that there is something happening. Not only flying saucers, but there might be actual people, beings, extraterrestrial beings." And here's the bottom line for him. God in his wisdom would not have created only us as humans. So there was a question posed by the audience. Is this UFO stuff the work of the devil? And by the way, I gave my first lecture down in Texas, I gave that. And in the newspaper the next day, a lady had been interviewed, and she says, "I think this is the work of the devil." So anyway, his answer, I wish I'd had this at the time because I could have posted it and she would have got the answer. The devil has nothing to do with this. God would never allow the devil to show this kind of manifestation in such a great form. He would never permit this. More recently, the Reverend Jose Gabriel Funes, head of the Vatican Observatory and scientific advisor to the Post, came out with a comment in 2008. He said, "How can we exclude that life has developed elsewhere? Certainly in a universe this big, you can't exclude this hypothesis. Just as there is a multiplicity of creatures on Earth that can be other beings, even intelligent, created by God. This is not in contrast with our faith because we can't put limits on God's creative freedom." It's the bottom line. Okay, how about our national security? There have been some which might perceive as threats to our national security reported by incidents of UFOs. Now, here's one, cover up at Vandenberg Air Force Base, and it was reported by Lieutenant Robert Jacobs. He was a physicist, I think, in optics, probably. Anyway, he was sent up to Big Sur. They set up well, here was the problem. They were doing missile testing out of Vandenberg and firing him off the West Coast. And the problem was they would work fine for a while, and then all of a sudden they would lose control. But they were so far away that they don't know what was going wrong. So they decided to have this telescope with a camera mounted on it and mounted on a unit that could do tracking just like radar, set up in Big Sur to track these launches to find out what the heck was going on. So in September of 1964, he was in charge of that project. And he said he was photographing an ICBM missile launch at Vandenberg using this specialized equipment. So he photographed it, and it was a film. He wasn't watching a video. He just turn on the camera and it tracks. I don't think he saw what it was actually photographing. Anyway, when he was done, he canned the film and headed back to base. He said the day after returning to base with the film for processing, he was ordered to go to the base headquarters by the commander and explain what was on it. Now, he hadn't seen it yet. So here he is viewing the film, and he said what he saw was the Atlas missile was being attacked by a flying saucer. He said at the time the missile was attacked, it was 60 miles up in the air, 400 miles downrange, and traveling at about 18,000 miles an hour. And all of a sudden this UFO comes on the scene, circles around it, and fires at it 4 times at the nose cone with probably a laser, I don't know. Here's my crude animation. Okay, so you got the idea, right? Anyway, the missile went out of control, as you can imagine, and there were men in that room. There's always men in the room with gray suits. And after reviewing the movie, if you would, they removed those scenes. And Jacobs was ordered not to talk about it. So anyway, his impression of the whole incident, he said he thinks that UFOs are basically, or the aliens, are trying to tell us to stop fooling around with nuclear weapons, nuclear missiles. There was another incident that occurred, actually a couple, that occurred, and it was kept secret for a long time, but in September 27th, 2010, 6 Air Force officers and enlisted people came forward. Okay, they had been sworn to secrecy, but I guess for some reason they decided that they couldn't wait any longer. They had to tell what they knew. Actually, this process of shutting down our missiles was happening all around the world. So here we are looking down the missile silo, just so you understand what we're talking about. And if you look at Montana has a number of missile silo setups there. Usually what it is they have a central control station. They're all underground. And then it's surrounded by 10 silos. So they have 10 missiles. And they have flights. So they might have one set up here with 10, and then over in another area close by maybe would be a duplicate of that. Okay? So that sets the stage. So Robert Salas was actually experienced one of these incidents, and some of the information I'm going to give you now came out of Open Minds magazine, published back in 2013. So here's a picture looking down the silo, and this is a quote from Robert Silas's article that appeared in that magazine. And then later, a year or two later, he came to Phoenix and gave a talk to the Phoenix MUFON. So we had a chance to ask questions. But anyway, here's the story. On March 16th, 1967, Echo Flight, which had 10 ICBMs, was disabled. 8 days later, nearby Oscar Flight, which is the one that Salas was in, was also disabled. And what Salas says in the article, this is his feeling. He says that they, being the aliens, understand the workings of human psychology and physiology intricately well. They are able to communicate and interact with humans in phenomenal ways that we cannot explain. They, the UFO occupants, can interfere with our most our most technologically advanced equipment. So that was the summary of what he believes. Then he tells a story about Tex, who's one of the technicians. Tex wasn't his real name, but he was a technician at Echo Flight, which you recall was the first one that was attacked. And so as these things were brought down, by the way, what would normally happen when Salas would arrive to work, he'd go down into the control session, and I guess there's this big board that has 10 lights on it, mostly green lights when they should be green. But what happened when he had his experience is all of a sudden, and he could feel that this was going to happen, but all the green lights went red, and that meant that missiles were no longer capable of being launched. Anyway, so Tex was out there trying to bring these missiles back up after they'd been shut down. And he said that they were hovering, the UFO was hovering above them, but he said that every time he was just about ready to bring them back up, they would shut them down again. He said, every time I got to a certain point in the checklist, they would shut them down again, almost as though they knew the sequence. And he said, I could feel the electricity coming down the launch tube, right toward him, like he was immersed in this static electricity. So there you can see, I don't know if Tex is in that picture or not, but. So, when Salas was here and giving his lecture, I asked him, I said, well, what do you think of this? Why do you think they're doing this? And he said the same thing that the other person said, that they don't want us messing around with nuclear missiles, and they will prevent that from happening. Okay, so now what about the search for ET? We have been looking for extraterrestrial life for quite a while. And we're looking for intelligent life, by the way, ideally, but I guess we'd take anything we could find. And we're still looking for intelligent life, even though we're still on Earth here. But someday we'll get intelligent. What are the requirements for life? If you're going to send out a probe into the universe to another galaxy or our galaxy, the first thing you have to do is define what the requirements are for life. And generally, liquid water heavy elements, peace and quiet, you can't have a lot of collisions, and low radiation. So if you're going to send a probe out here's a galaxy, where would you send your probe? You wouldn't send it here because a lot of radiation, everything's too close together. And you wouldn't send it out here because this is mostly just hydrogen gas, so there's not enough heavy elements to create any kind of a living being. So you would pick a place, and the place is called the Galactic Habitable Zone. And that happens to be where we are right there. So we happen to be in the right place. Now, we find a star in that zone, and we see that it has planets going around it, but we want to find a planet that is the right distance from that star, called the Goldilocks zone, in order to have that liquid water. And so far we think there might be 1 billion planets in our own galaxy with intelligent life. That's one of the summaries. So here we are looking at Kepler was a satellite that was sent up specifically to hunt for extrasolar planets. And it has found many, thousands of them. But here's one called Kepler 186. That was the name of the star. And it had several planets, and planet F happens to be in the Goldilocks zone. Now, on the solar system, our own solar system, Mercury is not in the Goldilocks zones. Venus is on the edge, and we're inside, so we're safe.